About Keith, long version. Thank you so much for taking time to come to keithkerwin.com. It is our intention here to make sure that we help all of our friends and clients get the answers they need to any questions they may have about anything that has to do with the Val d'Aran, Baqueira, or Spain. We are at your service. This video is simply a video about my arrival to Spain. It's quite lengthy, so please, if you're not too interested in learning about how I came to the Val d'Aran or to Spain, check out some other portion of our blog, become a subscriber, like us on Facebook. Be happy to help you, send us an email. Over the years, people are always asking me, Keith, how did you get to the Val d'Aran? Or why are you here in Spain? And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you the answer to that question. In fact, quite a few subscribers have recently asked me that same question, and that's what's promoted, or provoked me rather, to do this video. This is the long version. If you look down below, you'll find a shorter version, which certainly might be more interesting, because I'm not really that important. But anyway, I'm going to tell you the story in detail. That way you may know a little bit more about how I came to Spain. I was 25 years old. I was working and living in northwest Montana as a wilderness guide and a drug and alcohol counseling specialist. I grew up in the southern part of the United States, in Memphis and in Atlanta, although I was born in Chicago. And as a result of the fact that I grew up in the South, I didn't have any real experience with winter sports, especially skiing or snowboarding, although I did grow up doing all kinds of water sports, water skiing and things. In Montana, I learned to snowboard, and it just became a really significant passion for me, such that after a couple years working there in Montana, I decided to give away everything that I owned. I bought a 1972 Volkswagen bus with a camper top, with the intention of living in my bus for one winter with my dog. And I was going to go to Whistler, Canada, or to Colorado. I wasn't quite sure which place I was going to go to spend my winter. My vision was I was going to park my van in like a big snowdrift and just live in it. I spent a lot of time in the mountains at that juncture, so I was quite comfortable with sort of a rugged, hearty environment. I had a negative 60-degree sleeping bag, etc., etc., and I wanted to dedicate myself to snowboarding every day. So there I am. I had saved about $10,000 for this venture, or this adventure. This was in September of 1995. Before I began that adventure, I took off and went to the Western Africa for my first real international experience to spend a month with my sister, who was living in the Ivory Coast in Abidjan. Well, we decided to go traveling throughout the neighboring country called Mali. And while in Mali, in Bamako, Mali, we met a couple at a travel agency from Madrid, a nice guy named Miguel and his girlfriend Belen. We spent a great evening with them. We went out to dinner, and basically they told me that the plans that I had for snowboarding every day in the United States or in Canada, I could easily do in Spain. I thought that was pretty cool. Well, I just took down their information and finished my marvelous trip with my sister, Erica, and took off after the trip and went back to Montana. Well, the day that I returned to Montana, and this is a true story, the day that I returned to Montana, my aunt, my mother's sister, my Aunt Lynn, she phoned me. She was a flight attendant for United Airlines. She said, "Hey Keith, guess what? I've got a free round-trip ticket anywhere in the world for you." I was like, wow, that's off the hook. I hung up the phone and the wheels started turning. I started thinking, well, maybe I could go to Spain. Why not? At that very moment, my housemate, Genio, a guy of Italian descent, phoned me, said, "Hey Keith, I thought you'd be home. I just wanted you to know your dog and I, Tiva, we're in Missoula. Everything's fine. We'll be home in about 3 days. Just wanted to let you know everything was okay." And I said, "Genio, you're not going to believe it. My aunt just offered me a free round-trip ticket anywhere in the world." Well, he said, "Keith, without hesitation, I'll adopt your dog." I then called a girlfriend of mine and I said, hey, I told her the story. And she said, well, you can leave your van, your Volkswagen bus at my grandfather's farm, no problem. So the next thing I did a couple days later is I called Belen in Madrid, and she spoke English just a little bit, and I said, Belen, I will be there in 2 weeks. Will you help me? And she said, yes. She had no idea what that meant. So anyway, I took my bus to my girlfriend's grandfather's house. I took off the tires, I put it on cement blocks, I stuck it inside, I put everything inside. I bought a snowboard, beautiful Burton snowboard bag, put all my Burton gear in it, put in all my backcountry gear, my -60-degree bag, my stove, my tent, my bivouac, all my gear, because I had lots of really fantastic gear. And loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly, as they say, back home. 2 weeks later, I landed in Chicago for a 4-day layover with my family. My parents came up from Memphis to see me. My dad was just probably freaking out, man. He paid for my university. His son was, already kind of on the career path, and suddenly he's going to sell. He sold everything he's owned. He sold everything he owned. He sold his car. He bought a 1972 Volkswagen bus. Now he's going to Spain to spend a winter snowboarding. My mother was just beside herself. Her last words, my wife today says that her famous last words were, well, Keith, go to Spain and have a good time, but whatever you do, just don't fall in love. I guess mothers always know, don't they? So if you have a mother, she tells you something, you should probably know that she's right. So anyway, a few days later, I land in Madrid. I go to Belen's house. That's a whole adventure because I don't speak Spanish. I got all this mountaineering gear. It barely fits in the taxi. We got to tie everything on top of one guy's car. It was just kind of crazy. And when I get to her house, that was even a whole nother experience, trying to get up into her apartment. My gear basically filled her whole little apartment. I had to leave it out on the porch or on her little terrace. Anyway, I asked Bill, I'm thinking I'm going to find a ski shop. My idea is to find a ski shop. And I think that if I find a ski shop, I might find information about where to spend the winter skiing. So she says, oh, I think I know where there's a ski shop, and she draws a little map for me, and I follow the map. I think maybe I take a taxi or something, and I go to the ski shop. Well, I walk in, and guess what, ladies and gentlemen? There are no skis in this ski shop, but only tennis rackets. And the woman that works in the shop comes up to me and she says, blah, 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 blah. And you know what I said? I said, skis? And she said, blah, 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 blah. And we had a total breakdown. There was a 100% lack of communication. Because obviously I don't know what to say. And she says, there's this guy saying something about skis in my tennis shop. So, to my surprise, a woman that's a client in the shop comes walking up to me and says to me in English, well, what do you need? How can I help you? And I pull out my piece of paper. Belen, my friend, had taught me how to say, I'm here because I want to learn Spanish. I want to experience another culture, but most of all, I want to snowboard every day. And I had that written down on a piece of paper in Spanish. And so I pull that out and I start to read it to her. And she said, well, speak to me in English. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And I explained to her the situation, and she said, well, come here. And we go over to the counter in the shop, and she opens her purse and pulls out a business card and says, look, this is a good friend of mine. He just opened a ski shop in Madrid, and he speaks perfect English. Give him a call. No way, McKay. So I go back to Belen's house. Belen phones this guy's home, speaks with his mother, gives us the phone number of the shop. She calls the shop, introduces herself, explains the situation to this guy, and the guy invites me to his shop. Ski Market is the name of the shop in Madrid. He was such a huge piece of my whole story. I don't know if he knows that or not. Anyway, so I go to his shop. Remember, this is the long version. If you're still with me, thanks a lot. If you want to check out, I can totally understand because it's not necessarily that interesting, but people are always asking me, so I'm telling you. So I go to his shop, and we talk about, I'm a great guy. I think I spent like an hour or 2 hours with him. This is October 29th, 1995. I had arrived the 28th. And we basically decided that the best place for me to ski or snowboard for the winter is in the wonderful resort called Baqueira in the fantastic Pyrenees mountain valley known as the Val d'Aran. Although perhaps it wouldn't be the best place for me to learn Spanish because they speak Aranese and also because they speak Catalan. But we decided that snowboarding is actually the most important thing for me, and the language learning is relatively secondary. So I stay in Madrid for a few days. I leave all of my gear in Madrid, and I take two days of clothes in my smaller backpack, and I get the train from Madrid to Lerida. And that's quite an experience because I still can't really speak with anybody. And then in Lerida, I managed to get my way over to the bus station, and I take the bus up to Baqueira, which is also kind of another experience. And I'm on my way to this mountain valley where I don't really know anybody or know anything. And it's dark. Suddenly I realize it's dark and I don't have a clue what I'm doing. And there's a couple girls my age at that time, still my age, unless something weird's happened. They're just chatting and chatting and chatting, and I finally get the gumption, and I turn around and I say, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And the one nice young woman says, "Oh yes, a little bit." And I explain my situation to them, and when we arrive to Baqueira, she goes running across the road to whom I assume is her father, and then she beckons me along and says, "Come on." So I go over, and the next thing you know, I'm in her car. Turns out this is Jose Moga, one of the most renowned ski shop owners in the Baqueira Val d'Aran, and his lovely daughter Eva, who's now a neighbor and friend of mine, and her cousin Monica. So they basically start taking me up the valley to find a place to spend the night in a hotel or a hostel, and we stop in a couple places, and I understand that they're closed, and we finally make it to a village called Salardu, and we go into the town square of Salardu. This is 1995. There's no Etbot restaurant. There's nothing. It's a completely dark, small, dim lamplight, all stone. They open the door and they say, "Well, there you go to this hostel right here, knock on this door and you can stay there." And they disappear. They just leave me in total silence. November 2nd, 1995. Like my 7th day in Spain or something. 6th day. And they disappear, and I knock on the hotel door, and guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It's closed. So I kind of entered into a little bit of a panic moment because it was such a strange environment for me. And so I thought, oh, there's a door adjacent to that door, and I knock on the door, and the door opens, and there's a family eating, and the woman of the home apparently comes to the door, and I just say to her, I say, "Sleep?" You know, because I have a few verbs and I know a few words in Spanish from my wonderful high school Spanish class. But that's about it. And she basically says, "Well, we're closed, but if you go up the street, around the corner to this place called Bar Montaña, you'll find a place to sleep." And I go there. You know, that was kind of a whole interesting communication experience anyway. I go to the Bar Montaña, and I promise you, there must have been a Madrid-Barcelona football match because the bar was just off the hook, crazy loud. It was a little bit too much for me. I couldn't communicate with the barman, and I ended up going next door to another place where I found a room to stay for the night. That worked out well. First time I ever saw somebody take a tomato and just rub it all on the bread and make the wonderful, world-renowned pan con tomate of Catalonia. So, I'm nearing the end of this story, and I really thank you for taking all this time to come or to listen. I wake up the next morning, I hitchhike up to Baqueira to the ski station. It's November 3rd, 1995. The place is a ghost town. There's nobody there. A complete ghost town. So I'm starting to get hungry. That strong, crazy strong espresso coffee that I had that morning was starting to make me rattle, and so I'm thinking I got to find something to eat. And I come around the corner of this building, and there's these two guys working on a fluorescent sign. And I say to, I say to them, disculpa, comer, and because I can't speak, I just say like, excuse me, eat? And suddenly I hear, in New York American accent, where are you from, man? And I'm like, whoa. I pull out my piece of paper. I try to tell him my little story, in Spanish. And he's like, dude, speak to me in English. And so then I explained to him, and I'm like in shock because this guy's obviously American. A good friend of mine named Roy, who owns a wonderful snowboard shop in Baqueira called Cabin Fever. He had been living in the valley for some time, and what an amazing coincidence, hey? I had some pretty significant coincidences in this trip. Maybe they weren't coincidences, but anyway, maybe it was destiny, who knows? So I explained to Roy the situation, and he sends me off to get a sandwich, and he says when I come back, he suggests that I go back down to a village called Artias, to a restaurant called Montagut, and that I look for a guy named Carlos, and perhaps Carlos will give me work and housing for the winter. I was like, you're kidding me, that would be amazing, exactly what I'm looking for, because my thought is that if I can secure work and housing for the winter, then I'll go back to Madrid, I'll get all my gear, and I'll come up and go for it. So we're getting near the end of the story, ladies and gentlemen, of my arrival to the Val d'Aran. I go down to Artias, I find the restaurant, it's closed, can't find Carlos. I go across the street to what I now know is the famous historic bar Timbre, and I have another experience where I just can't communicate. It was just really off the hook loud, a bunch of guys, and I hear, Carlos, no stop, and I don't know what. So then I think, okay, well, I guess that didn't work out, and I hitchhike my way back up to Salardu, which isn't very far. And guess who picks me up, ladies and gentlemen? Maria Angels, the woman who I knocked on the door of her hotel, of her house the night before. She picks me up, and she, like everybody, she asks me, what are you doing here? Or how are you here? I don't really understand the language, but I understand the question because it's just obvious. So I pull out my piece of paper and I read to her my 3 lines. And she basically says, manages to communicate to me that I should come to her hotel or to her hostel the next night, which I think was a Friday at 8 p.m. and I could meet with her family, and perhaps I could work in their establishment and maybe secured employment for the winter. I thought that was fantastic. So I said, okay, you say me, your house, tomorrow 8. She was like, yes, 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 yes. So then I give Roy a call, the American guy I met a few hours before, and I explained to him that I can't find Carlos, but that I did meet this woman, this other woman in this hostel, Refugi Rosta. And he says, that's cool. And he says, well, why don't I come pick you up and we'll have some lunch? And he comes and he picks me up and we go to his house. And just before lunch, he says, I need to go help a friend of mine hang some shelves in before we have lunch. So let's go help her out. So the next thing I know, I'm walking into a woman's house. Her name is Elizabeth. And I have been with Elizabeth since that very day. I met Elizabeth on November 3rd, 1995, my first day in the Val d'Aran, and we've been together, married, and living happily ever after for a long time. Right now, I don't know what year it is you're watching this video, but I'm sure we're still together because she's an amazing lady. And she also had a marvelous 7-year-old daughter named Sandra, who I was fortunate enough to raise. I came here to have a snowboarding experience, and it turned out to be much more. I look forward to telling you more about myself, more about my story. That's the long version of my arrival. And I'm going to finish now before we get over the 20-minute mark. Please subscribe to my video channel, to my YouTube channel, to Facebook, Twitter. Give me a call, send me an email, and I'll be happy to help you out in any way possible. You're great. Have a nice day. Adios.